I witnessed that case still shocked me. A 62-year-old decorated police sergeant walked into my courtroom and made a mistake so devastating it ended 30 years of service in less than 20 minutes. I've seen thousands of cases, but what happened with Sergeant Robert Morrison proved that respect for the law has no retirement age. Before I tell you what destroyed this man's career, answer this question for me. Where are you watching this from? Comment your city below, like this video, and subscribe to this channel. And here's my other question for you. Do you think police officers should follow the same laws as everyone else when they're off duty? Yes or no? Write it in the comments. I want to know what you think. Okay, let's start. It was 10:45 inches the morning when the courtroom doors opened. In walked Sergeant Robert Morrison, 62 years old, 28 years with the Providence Police Department. But something felt wrong immediately. Morrison didn't walk like a man coming to pay a parking ticket. He walked like he owned the building. He didn't remove his cap when he entered. Small details, but after 3 decades on this bench, I notice everything. The clerk called his name, Sergeant Robert Morrison, citation for parking in a handicapped space while off duty, outside Tony's restaurant on Federal Hill. I looked up from my paperwork. You're charged with parking in a handicapped space. This occurred while you were off duty. How do you plead? I said. His answer should have been simple. Guilty or not guilty. 2 words. Instead, what came out of his mouth made my court reporter stop typing. I'm pleading not guilty because this citation represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how parking laws apply to law enforcement personnel, Morrison said. The courtroom went quiet. This was the silence of people sensing something bad about to happen. I set down my pen. Sergeant Morrison, were you responding to an emergency? He told me, No, Your Honor. But as a sworn officer, I maintain certain responsibilities that require flexible interpretation of civilian parking restrictions. I've been doing this job since before some of these officers were born. I've handled drug dealers, murderers, corrupt politicians. I know when someone is trying to talk their way out of accountability, he continued. Morrison wasn't just defending himself. He was lecturing me about the law. Sergeant, I said, can you cite the specific regulation that exempts off-duty police from handicapped parking laws? Morrison paused. For just a second, doubt crossed his face. Then his ego took over again. Your Honor, with respect, police operational protocols supersede municipal ordinances. Any experienced law enforcement professional would understand this. He just suggested I didn't understand law enforcement. Me, a judge who's been interpreting these laws since 1990. But Morrison wasn't finished digging his own grave. Your Honor, he continued, I've been enforcing these laws on the street for 28 years. I think I understand how they work in practice better than someone who only sees them from behind a bench. My bailiff took a step forward. Morrison had just insulted my understanding of the law to my face. I removed my glasses slowly, set them on the desk, looked directly at this 62-year-old sergeant who thought his badge made him untouchable. What I did next would end his career, but it would also teach every officer in that room a lesson they'd never forget. Sergeant Morrison waiting for me to respond. He thought he'd made his point. I asked him about his current role. Since he questioned my understanding of law enforcement, I wanted to hear about his role. He told me he was traffic division supervisor. So I asked him the obvious question. If he supervises officers who enforce parking violations, what does he tell them to do when they find an off-duty police officer parked illegally in a handicapped space? Morrison hesitated. I could see him thinking, choosing his words carefully. He told me they handle each situation based on specific circumstances. That wasn't what I asked. I needed a simple answer. Yes or no. Does he instruct his officers that police badges exempt people from handicapped parking laws when they're off duty? He started talking about operational considerations, but I stopped him. I needed yes or no. His face changed. The confidence started cracking. He finally said no. Exactly. No. Because there is no such exemption in Rhode Island law. I asked him to confirm that. His voice got quieter as he admitted there wasn't. I picked up another document from my file and told him I'd taken the time to review his record. Not just this citation. His entire professional file. He hadn't expected that. I explained what I'd found. Providence Police Department Policy, Section 4.2.3, clearly states that off-duty officers must follow all civilian laws. I asked if he was aware of this policy. He said yes, but tried to add something. I kept going. His internal affairs file showed 2 previous reprimands, one for what his supervisors called abuse of authority, another for unprofessional conduct toward civilians. Both mentioned his belief that his badge exempted him from rules that apply to other citizens. Morrison tried to interrupt. He said he didn't see how his personnel file related to a parking violation. I told him it related perfectly. He demonstrated the same attitude in my courtroom that got him in trouble with his own department, the same superiority complex, the same belief that the badge makes you special. I stood up from my bench. I don't do this often, but sometimes you need to look a man in the eye when you teach him the most important lesson of his career. I told Morrison he walked in here today thinking his 28 years of service would intimidate me. Instead, he'd shown me exactly why his supervisors have concerns about his judgment. Morrison's voice cracked. He begged me to reconsider. I told him I wasn't finished. He suggested that my 35 years interpreting the law meant less than his street experience. He implied that I don't understand how laws work in practice. He disrespected this court and the legal system he swore to uphold. The other officers were watching their colleagues' career collapse in real time. Some looked away. Others stared, learning a lesson they'd never forget. I explained my decision clearly. I was finding him guilty of the handicapped parking violation. The fine was $300. But that wasn't all. I picked up my gavel. I was also holding him in contempt of court for his disrespectful conduct. That was an additional $500 fine. But more importantly, I was directing court administration to send a complete transcript of this hearing to his Internal Affairs Division. Morrison's eyes went wide. He said I couldn't do that. I told him I could, and I was recommending that his department review his fitness for supervisory duties. Because a supervisor who believes his badge exempts him from the law is a danger to everyone he's supposed to protect. I need stop here because the crucial moment is coming. The decision that would change everything. Stay with me, because what Morrison said next crossed a line that no officer should ever cross. Morrison looked at me and said something that proved he still didn't understand. He told me I was destroying his career over a parking ticket. Just a parking ticket. I set my gavel down without striking it. Not yet. I told him I wasn't destroying his career. He destroyed it himself the moment he decided to argue with a sitting judge about the law while demonstrating complete ignorance of both legal principles and his own department's policies. Then I did something I rarely do. I walked down from my bench and stood directly in front of him. Sometimes a man needs to hear the truth face to face. I've handled over 400,000 cases, criminal cases involving police officers, internal affairs investigations, disciplinary hearings for law enforcement personnel. I explained something to him about authority and respect. The most dangerous law enforcement officers are those who believe their badge makes them above the law, above accountability, above the very legal system they swore to serve and protect. He tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. I told him he walked into my courtroom thinking he could intimidate me with his badge and his 28 years of experience. Instead, he demonstrated exactly why his own department had repeatedly disciplined him for abuse of authority. Then someone else spoke up. Captain Maria Rodriguez stood up. She identified herself as Morrison's commanding officer. She asked permission to address the court. I told her to go ahead. She said she'd been sitting in the back watching the entire proceeding. She told Morrison directly that I had just demonstrated the kind of professional respect and legal knowledge that he'd consistently failed to show in his supervisory role. Morrison turned to look at his captain. His face showed complete devastation. Rodriguez told him this was exactly what she'd been trying to address in his performance reviews. His belief that the badge made him special, his disrespect for civilian authority, his fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to serve and protect. I returned to my bench. The lesson wasn't just for Morrison anymore. Every officer needed to hear this. I told Morrison that a police officer who shows disrespect for judicial authority is the same officer who shows disrespect for constitutional rights. A sergeant who thinks parking laws don't apply to him is the same sergeant who thinks other laws are suggestions rather than requirements. Morrison's arrogance completely gone. I picked up my gavel again, told him his total fine was now $800 plus court costs. His contempt citation carried an additional $500 penalty, but the real punishment was just beginning. I explained that he'd be explaining to Internal Affairs why a sitting judge had serious concerns about his understanding of legal authority and professional boundaries, why I questioned his fitness to supervise other officers. Morrison begged me to reconsider. I needed stop again because the next moment changed everything. Stay with me, because what I discovered about Morrison's past would prove that this wasn't just about one parking ticket. It was about behavior that put senior citizens and vulnerable people at risk. I pulled out a thick folder from my desk, told Morrison I'd done something unusual. I'd contacted the city's Elder Services Department and requested records of complaints involving police interactions with senior citizens. His face went white. Over the past 3 years, 17 formal complaints had been filed against Sergeant Robert Morrison. All 17 involved senior citizens. Elderly people who said he was rude, dismissive, and used his authority to intimidate them. I read the first complaint out loud. She called police because teenagers were making noise outside her apartment at night. Morrison responded. According to her complaint, he told her she was wasting police resources and should stop bothering them with trivial matters. Morrison tried to interrupt. He said those complaints were exaggerated. I held up my hand. There were 16 more. Another report is car stolen. Morrison took the report, but according to the complaint, he suggested the man probably just forgot where he parked it, made a joke about senior moments. The car was actually stolen. Other report is about a 68-year-old widow woman. Someone tried to break into her home. She was terrified. Morrison responded, and according to her statement, he implied she was being paranoid, told her old people see threats everywhere. 2 weeks later, her home was burglarized. Morrison's captain, Rodriguez, stood up again. She said she needed to add something. She'd been reviewing these complaints for months. She'd tried to counsel Morrison, tried to make him understand that elderly citizens deserve the same respect and protection as everyone else. But Morrison always had excuses, always claimed the seniors were confused or exaggerating. Then I revealed the most important detail, the one that connected everything. The handicapped space where Morrison parked, it belonged to the restaurant owner's mother, an 84-year-old woman named Rosa Delgado. She had severe arthritis. That space was her only way to access her son's restaurant, where she worked part-time at the register. The day Morrison parked there, Rosa arrived for her shift. She couldn't find parking, had to walk 3 blocks on painful knees. By the time she reached the restaurant, she was in tears from the pain. Her son, Tony Delgado, came to court that day. I asked him to stand up and share what happened. He told the court about his mother, how she survived cancer 5 years ago, how she insisted on working because it gave her purpose, how that parking space was specifically designated for her by the city because of her medical condition. He said when his mother finally arrived that day, she was crying because her needs didn't matter. Tony told Morrison directly that his mother worked her whole life, paid taxes for 50 years, raised 4 children alone after his father died. She deserved better than having a police officer take her parking space because he couldn't be bothered to walk an extra minute. Morrison's face showed something then, maybe shame, maybe understanding, maybe just fear of losing everything. I told Tony to sit down and thanked him for his courage in speaking up. Then I addressed Morrison again, explained that this case was never just about a parking ticket. I told him that Rosa Delgado couldn't defend herself that day. She couldn't argue with a uniformed sergeant. She just walked 3 painful blocks and cried. But I could defend her. That's my job, to make sure that people who can't fight back have someone fighting for them. Morrison finally broke, really broke. His voice cracked when he said he didn't know about the woman, didn't know about her arthritis, didn't know she needed that space. I told him that was exactly the problem. He didn't know because he didn't care to know. Didn't bother to think about who might need that space or why. Just assumed his convenience mattered more than anyone else's needs. Rodriguez added something important. She said the department had offered Morrison training in community relations, training in working with elderly populations. He'd refused, said he didn't need it. I leaned back in my chair, told Morrison I was going to do something unusual. I was going to give him a choice. Option 1, accept the full penalties, $800 fine, contempt citation, internal affairs investigation, likely demotion or forced retirement. Option 2, something different. I told Morrison he could accept a modified sentence. The $800 fine would stand, but instead of the contempt citation and internal affairs investigation, he would do something else. He would complete 200 hours of community service, but not regular community service. He would spend those hours at the senior center on Federal Hill, helping elderly residents with daily tasks, shopping, medical appointments, home repairs, whatever they needed. He would attend the training his department offered on working with elderly populations. He would meet personally with every one of those 17 people who filed complaints, apologize face to face, listen to their stories, understand the impact of his behavior, and most importantly, he would meet Rosa Delgado, apologize to her, hear about her life, understand what that parking space meant to her. If he completed all of this within 6 months and his captain confirmed he'd shown genuine change, the Internal Affairs investigation would note his remedial efforts. His career might survive. If he refused or failed to complete it, the full penalties would apply, and I would personally recommend his immediate retirement. Morrison stood there, 2 years from full pension. His pride had nearly destroyed everything. He asked if he could accept the second option. I told him he could. But I warned him, if I heard one complaint during those 6 months, if he showed anything less than complete respect and dedication, the deal was off. He nodded, said he understood, thanked me. I struck my gavel. Court adjourned. Morrison left that courtroom a different man than the one who walked in. 6 months later, he returned to my courtroom. Captain Rodriguez came with him. So did Rosa Delgado. So did Tony. Rodriguez spoke first. She said Morrison had completed every hour of community service, attended every training session, met with every person who filed a complaint. She said she'd never seen such a complete transformation in an officer. Morrison had asked to address the court. I allowed it. He told me those 6 months changed his life. He said working with the seniors at the center taught him things 30 years of police work never did. He said meeting Rosa changed everything. She told him about surviving cancer, about losing her husband, about working at her son's restaurant because it kept her connected to life, about how much that parking space meant to her independence and dignity. Rosa stood up. She told the court that Morrison had become one of the center's most dedicated volunteers, that he helped her with grocery shopping every week, that he'd apologized so sincerely she forgave him completely. I looked at Morrison, told him I was proud of what he'd accomplished, that he'd proven something important, that change is possible at any age, that humility is strength, not weakness. I dismissed the Internal Affairs recommendation, told him his record would show completion of remedial training rather than disciplinary action. Morrison thanked me, said this experience saved not just his career but his soul. This story proves something crucial. Authority without humility is tyranny. A badge without compassion is just metal. And respect for our elders isn't optional. It's the foundation of a civilized society. See you next case.